to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine. Iraq, anyway.
The invasion of Iraq after the 9/11 incident has received severe criticism over the years, as thousands of Iraqi citizens were killed, along with many American troops. The blame game around the people who instigated the war has been going on for years. However, it is widely known around the world that the then American President George W. Bush, along with other perpetrators, was responsible for destabilizing one of the major countries in the Middle East. Watch the video till the end as we tell you who is to blame for the Iraqi invasion. But before we do, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on any of the amazing content we have in store for you. Administration through process. The 2003 invasion of Iraq sparked the disintegration process for which Iraq and the entire region have paid a high price in blood. Contrary to what Bush's supporters claim, the notion that Iraq's ongoing horror story can be separated from Bush's war and the 8-year Anglo-American occupation is a blatant lie. Nonetheless, many of the critiques single out the present U.S. administration, particularly when it comes to the consequences of what some see as the U.S.'s withdrawal from the region. It may be unsettling to Americans, much alone millions of Iraqis, that the Bush administration wasted blood and treasure on a war motivated by the Ladin doctrine. Worse, the Bush administration utilized WMDs as a cover, relying on equal parts fear-mongering and strategic distortion, lying to achieve the intended political outcome. Indeed, some U.S. economists regard the idea that the Bush administration purposefully misled the country and the world into war in Iraq as a conspiracy theory. The role of Donald Rumsfeld. Indeed, even before 9/11, the then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld viewed Iraq through the lens of status and reputation, arguing in February and July 2001 that deposing Saddam would boost U.S. credibility and influence in the region, and indicate what U.S. policy is all about. The destruction of symbols of American military and economic domination on September 11th propelled these hypotheticals by Rumsfeld into reality. The Bush administration, after support from major sectors, felt compelled to reclaim the United States' undisputed hegemony after being humiliated. A swashbuckling victory in battle was the only way to deliver such a threatening message. But why Iraq? The reason behind this was pretty simple. Afghanistan was insufficient, as it was essentially a weak state, and in order to gain a fearsome reputation among everyone, you cannot fight the weakest in the yard. On the night of 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld famously said that the U.S. needed to bomb something else to prove that we're big and strong and not going to be driven around by these types of attacks. Furthermore, Afghanistan was a just war, a retaliation for the Taliban's provision of safe haven for top al-Qaeda leaders. Restricting reprisal to Afghanistan was considered harmful by Rumsfeld, Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, and Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Douglas Feith. They claimed that doing so would appear as a show of weakness rather than strength, and would embolden rather than dissuade governments hostile to the U.S. They understood that delivering a message of uncontrolled power would necessitate a disproportionate response to 9/11, one that would have a go beyond Afghanistan. Invading Iraq. Iraq met the criteria since it was more powerful than Afghanistan and has been in the crosshairs of neoconservatives since George H.W. Bush's 1991 decision not to go to Baghdad. Before 9/11, a regime that remained stubborn despite military defeat was barely bearable. However, it became untenable after that. Several sources, including the principals themselves in private, confirmed to the fact that the sole reason for invasion of Iraq by the Bush administration was just for show, as they believed a swift and definitive triumph in the Arab heartland would send a message to other countries, particularly resistant regimes like Syria, Libya, Iran, and North Korea, that American hegemony was here to stay. Simply put, the Iraq War was fought to re-establish America's position as the world's dominant force. The George W. Bush administration began actively lobbying for military engagement in Iraq in late 2001. The rationale for the Iraq War, including the 2003 invasion and later battles, was contentious. The Iraq Resolution, a joint resolution of the United States Congress, outlined the basic rationale for the Iraq War. The goal, according to the U.S., was to disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction, end Saddam Hussein's terrorism support, and free the Iraqi people. The United States relied on the authority of UN Security Council Resolutions 678 and 687 to employ all necessary means to compel Iraq to comply with its international responsibilities, the rationale for the invasion of Iraq stated. Alleged weapons of mass destruction. The US and the UK alleged in the run-up to the invasion that Saddam Hussein was developing weapons of mass destruction and hence posed a threat to his neighbors and the international community. On November 8, 2002, the UN Security Council overwhelmingly enacted Resolution 1441. The Security Council's 15 members agreed to give Iraq one more chance to comply with its obligations and disarm, or face the catastrophic repercussions of failing to do so. The UN Monitoring and Verification Commission and the International Atomic Energy Agency were given more authority under the resolution, allowing them to go anywhere at any time and speak with anybody to verify Iraq's disarmament. The invasion and occupation of Iraq were poorly planned, conducted, and ultimately failed. It has had disastrous effects for many countries, not just Iraq. It did the exact reverse of what it was supposed to do. It exposed the limits of American military might, and it enabled Osama bin Laden to do something he could never have done on his own, as it drew the US and its allies into an open-ended global struggle with extremists. Bush presided over the majority of the Iraq War, which was authorized by bipartisan votes in the US House of Representatives and Senate in October 2002. The 2002 authorization included Iraq's alleged non-compliance with the 1991 ceasefire agreement, the country's brutal repression of its civilian population, Iraq's harboring of al-Qaeda members in the aftermath of the September 11, 2001 attacks, Iraq's payment of bounties to the families of suicide bombers, and the governments of Turkey, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia fearing Saddam Hussein and wanting him removed. The motivation behind the war. One close advisor to then Vice President Dick Cheney claimed that Dick's motivation for the war was to demonstrate that America is able and ready to strike at someone. The Ledeen Doctrine, named after neoconservative historian Michael Ledeen, was coined by Jonah Goldberg in a 2002 column, which stated that every 10 years or so, the US needs to pick up some small, miserable little country and toss it against the wall, just to show the world they mean business. Shortly after the invasion, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and other intelligence agencies largely discredited evidence related to Iraqi weapons and alleged al-Qaeda ties, and the Bush and Blair administrations began to focus on secondary reasons for the war, such as the Saddam Hussein government's human rights record and promoting democracy in Iraq. According to polls, almost everyone in the world opposed a war without a UN authorization, and the opinion of the US as a threat to international peace rose dramatically. Even though most of the responsibility lay on Bush and his team, the Iraqi state did not help either. Iraq would have been stronger if Paul Bremer, the American proconsul in Baghdad, and his boss Donald Rumsfeld had opted to abolish Saddam's army, the one institution that somewhat unified the country, in the early wake of the US invasion. If Bremer and Rumsfeld had also sent more US soldiers into the streets to maintain order, Iraq might have remained calm rather than devolving into sectarianism, anarchy, and violence. Chaos all around. The Bush administration opened Pandora's box by invading Iraq and ousting Saddam Hussein. Given what has happened since 2003 is almost comical, as Iraq was proposed as a democratic example for other Middle Eastern countries, similar to Turkey or perhaps Jordan, with a Hashemite restoration. Today it faces a deadly disintegration into three sectarian mini-states: Sunnis in the west and northwest, Kurds in the northeast, and Shiites in the center and oil-rich south. On August 31, 2010, the U.S. formally ended its combat mission in Iraq, while thousands of troops remained in the nation until December 2011. Due to an increase in regional insecurity, U.S. soldiers returned to Iraq in June of 2014, and the number of American foot troops reached 3,550 in June 2015. Department of Defense officials said that they were there to keep the 200 to 300 people that worked in the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad safe. The admission. Even though everything is crystal clear as to who were the main instigators of this war, the Bush administration has never openly admitted that the invasion of Iraq was brutal and wholly unjustified. Critics of the conflict say the Bush administration purposefully falsified evidence to justify an invasion it had planned for a long time. The United States led the effort to redirect former Iraqi WMD scientists, technicians, and engineers to civilian employment and discourage emigration of this community from Iraq. Some Bush administration officials have been known to let their guard down. In 2006, Feith accepted that the reason for the war didn't rest on the contents of this intelligence, and even the intricacies of the intelligence at times were just elements of the public presentation. Recently, George Bush himself was speaking at an event on elections at the Presidential Center in Dallas, when he made an error while condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Instead of saying the brutal invasion of Ukraine, he mistakenly said brutal invasion of Iraq, before correcting himself to say he was denouncing the invasion of Ukraine. His exact words were, "The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq, of Ukraine," and he laughed it off by blaming his age for the mistake. Many analysts around the world are terming it poetic justice. The war in Iraq resulted in more than 4,000 American troops, as well as tens of thousands of Iraqi citizens being killed in the war. Critics have long held Bush responsible for the war, stating that Iraq lacked the weapons of mass destruction that Bush feared. To this day, many Iraqis and the rest of the neighboring countries are still suffering the consequences of President Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, and their colleagues' early decisions. Well, that's it for today's video. We hope you enjoyed the content of the video. If you did, show some love and hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you never miss out on our amazing and informative videos in the future.